The message of the Indian National Army, which was part of the provisional government of Free India, was, to put it in one word, secularism. Secularism has been bandied about as a term in India for decades, if not centuries. But the INA, the Indian National Army, was the finest example of practical secularism. Because what happened was soldiers and officers of the British Army who had been captured by the Japanese forces in Southeast Asia switched allegiance to the INA. And under the umbrella of the INA, of which Subhash Bose was the supreme commander, an element of secularism was introduced. Here we sit together, there are vegetarians, non-vegetarians, sitting on the same table. It's commonplace. But in those days, in the British Indian Army, they used to sit in separate messes. So a Hindu would eat in one mess, a Muslim in another, and a Sikh in a third. Now that he did away with immediately. Everyone ate together. And taking it from there, there were many such examples of integration between the communities. Then there came a time, of course, when after the struggle, which ultimately was met with tremendous force by British forces and the US Air Force, there came the trial of the INA officers at the Red Fort in Delhi in November and December of 1945. Now, these people, the officers, were being tried for treason. Treason for what? Because of having opposed the King Emperor. And they were put on trial. And for the first time, Indians, because previously news about the Indian National Army had been suppressed largely and censored in India, they came to know the full story of the valiant effort that the INA had made to free India. They were actually given charge of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. The INA forces entered India in Nagaland and Manipur, and ultimately, when these officers were put on trial, the British made the big mistake of putting one Hindu, one Muslim, and one Sikh on trial together. Shahnawaz Khan, Prem Sehgal, and Gurdial Dhillon. And this created an explosion and a unity which was unforeseen, and it was unprecedented. I doubt very much if such unity in India across communities has been since seen, because it is described as, and I will quote Nehru, who said at the time of the trial, the INA trial has created a mass upheaval. The trial has taken us many steps forward in our path to freedom. Never before in Indian history has such unified sentiments been manifested by various divergent sections of the population. And Gandhi, at the time of the INA's trial, said that though the INA failed in their immediate objective, they have a lot to their credit of which they might well be proud. The greatest among these was to gather together under one banner men from all religions and races of India and infuse into them the spirit of solidarity and oneness to the utter exclusion of all communal and parochial sentiment. So that really was a fine example, and any historian will tell you that Field Marshal Auchinleck went to the then Viceroy of India, Lord Wavell, and told him, I think it is time to quit India. Why? Because the Indian ranks in the British Army and the British Navy, which was all Indians, of course, and in the Air Force, had mutinied. And the mutiny had spread even to the ranks of the police. And therefore, Auchinleck had visions of 1857. And so at the very least, I think the lasting contribution of Subhash Bose has to be that he hastened Indian independence, while the Gandhian movement had created a mainstream. That said, I am absolutely delighted to welcome Professor Pfaff. She has known me since I was born, because I happened to be born in Vienna, her original home city. And so she really knows me very well, and I know her reasonably well. She came to India for the first time when she was just 18, and I remember that very clearly because she arrived in Calcutta, and India went mad. She was front page news almost every day during the 3 months that she spent in India. When she went to Delhi, she was the house guest of Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru at Teen Murti House. So from that, she of course felt that her calling was really economics and not the politics of India. And so she comes here today as a professor of economics, and to not only talk about India, her father, the freedom of India, and what has happened since, but perhaps do so from the perspective of an economist. I thank her for her presence. I'd also like to mention Dr. Lalwani, who has often been telling me, he's an ardent admirer of Subash Bose, and he often tells me that, do you know, I vividly remember that when it came to the trial as to how India united. And so with those words, I have great pleasure first in inviting Virendra Sharma, MP, to say a few words.
Your Excellency, Anita ji, all the distinguished guests, good evening. When I was asked to come and join you this evening, I was told that who is coming. So my role was to come and listen, and that is what we are all expecting, to hear someone. But then Ashish very kindly suggested this morning that if I come and welcome everyone here as a member of parliament, as a friend, and also as a great admirer of Subash Bose. I must share that about 4 years ago, I was asked to come and speak about Subash ji. And some friends in public life use the different terms, and on the social media started questioning me who I am supporting, who I am admiring. And a journalist from The Guardian wrote back to that person to say, stop this. What Brinder is doing and what you're doing are the two different things. But you definitely helping Brinder's popularity amongst the Indians while you are attacking him, supporting. So that is what the Indians in general think about Subhash Chandra Bose ji, his contribution, his role in the freedom movement, and the positive role. Ashish has spoken in great length, but the message or the vision given by Subhash Chandra Bose ji on secularism, equality, and the vision for the future, not before India's independence, but after India's independence, what kind of India he had the vision for. That is what his contribution is. And if I look around, I have made my notes, but now looking at when His Excellency is here, Deputy High Commissioner, the great scholar is here, and many others here, then if I start speaking about Subhash Chandra Bose's life, his role in the INA and the creation and the Indian Congress Party, which I have great admire for that political party in India, that my father belonged to the Congress Party, so his role in the Congress Party, and then positive role during the differences and the maturity shown by Subhash Chandra Bose to keep the India's freedom movement united rather than dividing in that. That role he played at that time, which everybody, those who have the students of history will know that if he, I mean Swashji, wanted to divide the Indian freedom movement at that time, he could have done it. But it was him who played such a positive role to keep the Indian freedom movement united under the leadership of Mahatma Gandhi and others. I can go on, but I don't have that intention to go on, but because we are fortunate with the help of Ashish ji, when we are celebrating the 70th anniversary of India's independence, when we declared in the presence of Indian High Commission that this is going to be the India-UK Year of Culture, I feel proud to welcome a person who can do better justice than anybody else here, except His Excellency, which he will be later on, to do. And it's my great pleasure and honor to invite and present to you Dr., which I don't want to pronounce because I know the pronunciation will be wrong, where the only child and the daughter of the great leader of our nation, Subhash Chandra Bose's Anita Bose-Paff. Please welcome.
Your Excellency, Mr. High Commissioner, Your Excellency, Mr. Deputy High Commissioner, if I may say, Comrade Sharma, because I'm a fellow Social Democrat, Ashish Ray, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the warm welcome, and thank you very much for the invitation. In a way, you put me in a very difficult situation, because somehow you have been raising the expectations that I should give you a very profound lecture on something, but actually I'm a bit out of my depth in so far that being an economist, I really was asked to talk about a topic which is, if anything, more historical or maybe political science oriented. So I'm a bit out of my own field, because it's not going to be an economic lecture, which also would be difficult because I'm not an economic historian and also not a knowledgeable student of today's Indian economic development. But let me try to do justice to remembering together with you 70 years of independence and sharing with you some of the thoughts that I have, that I can speculate that maybe my father might have had. And I have to admit that I'm not all that qualified to talk about my father in any better way than any of you, because I have also not known him personally. I was 4 weeks old when he saw me last, and in that sense it was not a lasting impression on me. I don't remember very much of those days, as you can probably imagine. Well, 70 years have passed since India and Pakistan celebrated the attainment of their independence on the 14th and the 15th of August 1947. Most of you present here made the UK their home since then. And it always strikes me as kind of a joke that today many more persons hailing from the Indian subcontinent live in the UK than any British people ever lived in India during the times of British rule. Evidently today there are Indians and Pakistanis and Bengalis who can be found in every walk of life, and of course Mr. Sharma, who has just introduced me, is a very good example of that. I think from the House of Lords to members of Parliament to very simple labourers, from erudite academics to near illiterates, you find all sorts of people coming from the Indian subcontinent who live here. And for them, I think it is not a contradiction to be calling these two countries their, or 4 countries by now. If you think of the 3 countries on the Indian subcontinent, their home, and calling Britain their home. You might say that this is a perfect form of integration, which in a time of extensive migration is, I think, very important. It's also a form of overcoming colonialism. I mean, particularly for the younger ones amongst you, colonialism of the old type is long past, and they have gone beyond that. Or you might also say the chicken have come home to roost. Maybe the native British, or as in Germany, as we sometimes say the bio-German, so let me say the bio-British, particularly the less well-to-do and less educated, may feel a bit threatened and overrun by the ex-colonial immigrants. Or maybe today their fear of the immigrants refers more to the Eastern European immigrants from Poland and other countries. Well, when my father was a student in Cambridge around 1920, he felt rather gratified that British or bio-British had to brush his shoes because he was a student at Cambridge. Well, today that would probably not happen, because if anyone cleaned anyone's shoes in a hotel or in a student's dormitory, which seems rather unlikely, it would probably be the less qualified ex-colonials or guest workers from Poland. If you look back on the developments in Britain and the Commonwealth, the older among us can remember a period when Commonwealth citizens could come to live and work in the UK quite easily. But we can also recall a period when the UK refused entry to Indians with British passports, when they were turned out of their East African homes. And even today, Commonwealth citizens who are permanent residents in the UK enjoy more rights than would be the case for foreign citizens in many other countries. For example, the fact that Indians and Pakistanis and Bangladeshis and members from the Commonwealth elsewhere have the vote here is not a matter-of-fact thing, even within the European Union, which hopefully is not quite strange to you yet. You don't have that right only on the local government level. You can the other EU citizens have the vote, and not for any other level of government. Now, what did independence mean for India over the last 2 centuries? In the mid-19th century, India tried to shake off the foreign yoke in what the British called the Sepoy Mutiny. Of course, as a woman, I have to think first and foremost of the Rani of Jhansi, who fought valiantly, though ultimately without success. In 1885, the Indian National Congress was founded, and slowly the awareness of what freedom would mean for the Indian population grew, and was also changed over time. If I think of my grandparents' generation, which goes back to the late 19th century, early 20th century, for them, I think many of the things that my father's generation did must have sounded somewhat extreme, because they were sort of settled in a different mind frame at the time. 70 years ago, the Indian subcontinent gained political autonomy. However, not quite the way that the 2 legendary icons of the independence struggle would have envisaged, Mahatma Gandhi and my father Netaji on the other hand. They both were strongly opposed to the partition of the country, and it is rather tragic that for both of them this had to happen. Of course, Mahatma Gandhi must have experienced that in a rather dramatic sense. Of course, it dramatically ended in his death after all. And when my father was no longer alive, let me address this quite clearly, this is my opinion, and so he did not live to have to experience that. Now, Netaji outlined, for example, in his inaugural address to the Indian National Congress when he was elected president in 1938, that the principle of divide and rule has been one applied in Britain before, in the Near East and in other parts of the world. Also in India, they applied this principle, be it in the practice followed in the British Indian Army. Ashish referred to that just now, that people of different creed had to eat in separate places, of course, officers and soldiers anyway. And also in other ways, for example, in the attempt to partition Bengal in the early 20th century. We cannot blame the British completely for the partition, because after all there existed enough mistrust on the part of the Muslim leadership as the representatives of a very large minority vis-à-vis the Hindu majority. And there was a lot of pressure also on their part to push for their own state. But in any case, this ended in a tragedy, in my opinion. Interestingly enough, Mahatma Gandhi had lost the influence on his previously so obedient followers. He was opposed to partition, and yet his previous followers ignored it. Netaji, on the other hand, had enjoyed a fairly extensive trust on the part of the Muslim leadership. And as Commander-in-Chief of the INA, Ashish pointed this out, he did away with the practices of the British Indian Army of separating people into different groups. In the beginning, as Shahnawaz Khan, for example, once mentioned, there was a certain skepticism about this, but when they saw that he himself also lived this belief, I think they sort of encompassed that in a very genuine way. And it was a custom in the Indian National Army, for example, to eat together, to celebrate together. For example, when the different creeds had the festivities for their own religion, they used to invite the others to join in. After partition, we know what happened. It was a rather sad and a rather shameful thing that happened. Particularly if you think that the majority religion, Hindus, and a small minority by now Buddhists, by nature are supposed to be a very peaceful and also very tolerant religion. And the Christians are supposed to love their enemies. The outcome was not very brotherly and not very peaceful. The fact that hundreds of thousands were killed and some really awful atrocities happened, some very sad things happened, cannot really be explained, but unfortunately it didn't end there, because we all know that over time this continued in a way. Of course, one way it continued was the war between Pakistan and India. But the other way was also that you continued to have conflicts between the different religious groups within India. People from one creed were killed by those from another, and so on. Whether it was Sikhs who were killed after Indira Gandhi's assassination, or Muslims by Hindus, or Hindus by Muslims, it has not ended with partition, and maybe it's in the human nature that we are not very peaceful, and we are not always very respectful towards other beliefs and other creeds. It's really a shame, in my opinion, that two rather poor countries like India and Pakistan continued to spend a lot of their GNP on armament. I know India is one of the greatest importers of defense goods. Pakistan probably too, I'm not so sure, maybe they spend less on that. But I do not understand why it had to come to that these countries spent a lot of the money on defense, especially against each other, essentially. Even they needed a nuclear bomb, which I don't see the use of at all.